Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by On Target Radio. From firearms and Second Amendment rights to personal freedoms and government intrusions. Listen here Sunday nights at 9.
When you've got questions, he always has an answer. It's Sean Hannity this afternoon at 2, right before Joe Walsh at 5 on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. An underappreciated moment or two, 5 minutes from on Wednesday during the Mueller hearing, the first one before House Judiciary, was one of the first ones. Steve Chabot, Republican from Ohio, who framed his back and forth with Mueller thusly.
Thank you. Director Mueller, my Democratic colleagues were very disappointed in your report. They were expecting you to say something along the lines of, here's why President Trump deserves to be impeached, much as Ken Starr did relative to President Clinton back about 20 years ago. Well, you didn't. So their strategy had to change. Now they allege that there's plenty of evidence in your report to impeach the president, but the American people just didn't read it. And this hearing today is their last best hope to build up some sort of groundswell across America to impeach President Trump. That's what this is really all about today.
Yeah, that is basically what it was all about that day on Wednesday. And what we find is Democrats trying to recast what the Mueller report contains and doesn't contain. And think we also find, per Mueller's own testimony, as Kim Strassel observes in the Wall Street Journal, that what we were told was the investigation was solely about Russian electoral interference and obstruction of justice. It's now clear it was equally about protecting the actual miscreants behind the Russian collusion hoax, and that speaks to what was omitted, what we know with spectacular color Mueller and his team didn't look at. The origins of the mess, the other campaign in 2016, and that moment was reinforced no more so than this Q&A between Chabot and Mueller that led to a spectacular admission of omission.
When discussing the June 2016 Trump Tower meeting, you referenced, quote, the firm that produced Steele reporting, unquote. The name of that firm was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
And you're on page 103?
103, that's correct, volume 2. When you talk about the firm that produced the Steele reporting, the name of the firm that produced that was Fusion GPS. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not familiar with that.
Let me just help you. It was. It's not a trick question or anything.
Wow. It's still a wow every time you hear it. John Podhoretz, no fan of Trump. You know, he's the editor of Commentary, often critical of Trump. Maybe not a never Trumper, but pretty close. He writes about this. Robert Mueller breaks his silence and still has nothing in the New York Post. The release of the report found no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia. That's what it says. And we talked to Juan Williams yesterday. They're trying to recast even what is in plain black and white.
Right, I know.
On
like
that
we
matter.
live in different universes.
Podhoretz goes on in his piece in the Post to say, Mueller isn't going to save anybody from Trump. Hell, I'm not so sure he can even drive himself home. If anything, what happened today is just another piece of evidence that the Democrat Party's determination to indulge its base obsessions in the face of polls screaming at them to stop is just going to get Trump reelected. For more on this topic, the legal piece of it, not so much the electoral political piece, we're pleased to be joined again by our friend James Fitzgerald. He is famed, retired now, FBI criminal profiler, special agent. And you know James Fitzgerald, the name, because he was part of the team that identified the Unabomber and brought the Unabomber to justice. That's memorialized in Manhunt, which you get on Netflix. Excellent. It's an excellent series. And also check out James Fitzgerald's books, A Journey to the Center A Journey to the Center of the Mind. James Fitzgerald, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan. Good morning, Amy. How are you guys today?
Good morning. So, as a career FBIer, how do you think former director held up on Wednesday?
As a career FBIer and having spoken to a number of my former career FBI folks, some of them which lie on both sides of the political aisle, everyone was greatly disappointed in him, not only what he said, but how he said it, and of course what he didn't say, what he couldn't answer, how he refused to answer some questions. We agree. We've never seen anybody sit at that desk in front of Congress people in any sort of a committee or subcommittee hearing and get away with answering so few questions based on this alleged only the four corners of the report will I respond to. But there are other very legitimately asked questions that somehow he, after consulting with his sidekick, sort of his chief of staff, I guess, Aaron Zebley, decided, no, that's not the answer I want to give. But even that was after he had to have the question repeated to him several times. So I'm not going to get too much into his physical or mental health situation. There are some serious questions about where he is right now in his life. Interestingly, juxtapose the same man at the same age to President Trump, and it's two different people in that regard in terms of their overall demeanor, their persona, their ability to talk and walk and say what's being said. But the bottom line is the actual testimony itself over two parts on Wednesday. Mueller was clearly out of his comfort zone. He did not want to be there, and not only did he not answer many questions, but the answers he gave, including that one about the not knowing fusion GPS, was really the tell-all of where this guy was coming from. He was clearly the titular head of this task force, this special counsel, and there were people beneath him, and no doubt Andrew Weissman, who were really running the show.
Right. That was obvious to everyone. Like, he had nothing to do with this. He was just the face of the operation. But did you learn anything new at all?
I learned what he at least pretended he didn't know. And, I mean, the silence was deafening, or his non-answers were deafening in that regard. I was really waiting for, it was a very anticlimactic hearing, both of them. I didn't watch every minute of both of them, but I picked up a good bit of them. And I was kind of hoping one way or the other to have like a Colonel Nathan Jessup moment in it, like from A Few Good Men. And you can't handle the truth and, lecture to all of us across the land that we're stepping in places we shouldn't go. But instead, it was a very mild and milquetoast sort of guy who just was sort of mumbling away incongruent sentences sometimes. It really didn't even make any sense. So I learned nothing. He gave one answer in the morning about there were crimes committed by the president, and he had to sort of correct that afterwards when he came back with the second hearing.
Right.
So what I learned is he is a very confused man, and he was the head of the special counsel investigation for 2 years, where $40 million or so of our money was spent. I think we could have found somebody a little better than that at this stage in his life to spend that money on.
Did you get the sense that he was trying to protect anyone, whether it's members of his team, starting with his deputy there, Andrew Weissman, you mentioned, who's under renewed scrutiny, and it's about time he got the level of scrutiny he deserves, number one, and also just it seems to be the partisan headhunting that was going on by some that were part of his team with respect to indifference as to the origins of the investigation, indifference as to the Steele dossier and the talk about connections to Russia, any of those connections, indifference to just sort of anything that wasn't directly contained within Trump world.
Well, it's clear if these things were looked at during the 2+ year investigation, they didn't make it into the report, or at best a footnote, very vaguely and nebulously written. It certainly didn't come up in any, the statement by Mueller about a month ago, or about 8 minutes or so, with no Q&A afterwards, and certainly in these two hearings on Wednesday. None of those issues came up. They were just the aspects of this case they could not touch. And I'm sure they were told not to touch that by those above, anybody who may have any say in that particular long-term investigation. So there were people being protected, and it's no doubt, Mueller, and throughout his career, may have been an honorable man. I told you the last time I was on back in April, I did work with Mueller. I was in his room discussing the anthrax case, which of course was totally blown until all his people were put out. Another team came together. We then finally solved the anthrax case. That's just one example. Weissman with the whole Enron thing, which, a bunch of these convictions, the company is basically shut down, and then other Supreme Court decisions are made that, overturn all the legal aspects of that case, and the people are unfounded. And the case itself is unfounded. The charges brought against them. So now all of a sudden Weissman has an open budget, an open amount of people. He can appoint anyone he wants. I have no doubt it's Weissman that staffed the special counsel, going to Strzok and Page and others down the line. And, maybe he just looked around the night at Hillary's victory celebration and said, "Oh, I want you, I want you, I want you," just in case this thing doesn't work out. And it looks like that's who he surrounded himself with, which is never a good sign in any kind of a supposedly objective investigation. This thing never was. It had its mind made up, its collective mind made up going in. We know the crimes. Now we just have to prove to ourselves how they were committed. Unfortunately, they couldn't do that.
Do you think it was a politically motivated investigation? Excuse me. Knowing that
without a
Weissman
doubt,
was
any
in
stronger
charge.
than without a doubt.
Part-
Yeah, I do think it was politically motivated. I think it was the backup plan, the insurance plan that Strzok referenced, even though a text not too long before or after, there is no there. But nonetheless, they had to find some way to bring this president down, and I have no doubt it was an attempt at a coup. And they did their best, and of course they're still trying in various ways. But fortunately, it isn't even so much what Trump did. He and his people just told the truth, and that hurts cases a lot of times when in fact there are no actual charges there to begin with. And that's what we have here. And the best they could grab onto was, nothing with Russia, no collusion, no conspiracy. Oh, but while he's being charged of death penalty offenses, including his sons being charged with death penalty offenses, that is treason, he gets pretty upset a few times and yells at some people and even says, "Man, maybe I should fire this guy." And go fire him. And no, we're not going to do that. Okay, well, that's one of the major charges they're throwing against him under obstruction of justice, which is just nonsense. It's almost being charged for thought crimes, and the whole ruse of the investigation itself was just designed to make the president act in certain ways and say certain things, and then, we have him now.
Yeah.
Look, obstruction of justice. All bogus, and that's not a way to run an investigation. Now, as I've said before, as an FBI agent, if the only charge I ever got out of a long-term investigation was obstruction of justice or lying to an FBI agent, my buddies would have kind of laughed at me on the side and said, "That's the best you can do, Fitz." Well, in this case, it's the best they could do, and it's very, very weak.
Yeah, that's a great point you make about essentially trying to charge over a thought crime, which is what totalitarian regimes do. That's sort of worth noting. In addition to that, the inconsistent application of the law, even with respect to quote unquote process crimes. And that was another bad moment for Mueller, where he couldn't exactly explain, he just chose not to, why George Papadopoulos is charged with lying to the FBI over the same information that Joseph Mifsud, who's the originator of the information about Russia having dirt on Hillary Clinton, and according to his own report, Mueller's report, lied to the FBI 3 times, why he wasn't charged.
I think that stuff will be coming out too with the Inspector General's report down the line. Mm-hmm. Just real quick here, an ending in Chicago has a bit of a connection to this. I look at this whole case and this whole thing with Trump as the old TV show and even the movie, The Fugitive. Remember, Dr.
Yes.
Richard Kimball was falsely charged with a crime. Everybody's rooting with him throughout the TV show of the 60s and the early 90s movie, knowing that he didn't kill his wife. There's some bad guy out there. And then when it's finally, he's committing crimes, he's stealing cars, he's pushing police officers away, he's running away, breaks into a hospital, does all these things against the law, but finally at the end he's proven innocent. And that's the end of the movie. Well, here, that's kind of what we had with Trump. He knew he was innocent. Most people knew he was innocent. He gets away with it. But now there's a sequel to the movie. Well, you pushed that police officer. Well, you broke into the hospital, and so we're going to charge you. You didn't kill your wife, Mr. President. We're going to charge you with these crimes anyway. So I in the last few months, I just saw this analogy in my head. Boy, this could be a real good movie, except it doesn't stop when he's innocent. They make up all these crimes afterwards, what he did, in an attempt to prove he's innocent. And again, it's life imitating art, but in a very sad and quite frankly scary way.
Oh. Wanted to just get your take on Comey too. You mentioned the forthcoming Inspector General report. Comey was at it again before the Mueller hearing, talking about he welcomes the investigation by the investigators, just as he had written in the Washington Post a couple months earlier in an op-ed. We asked former FBI Assistant Intel Director Kevin Brock yesterday if he thinks Comey really does welcome the investigation of the investigators. He suggested not so much. What do you think?
Oh, he's not welcoming this at all. Or he lives in some sort of a fairyland if he thinks that his Boy Scout image is going to carry him this far. I am highly disappointed with how Comey ran those several years up to the election, and of course a year or so afterwards, or actually about 6 months afterwards, while he was still in office. No, he's getting out in front of this the best way he can. There's no doubt he has legal advisors and PR advisors telling him, no, you got to drop a tweet every and do an interview every week or so just to keep your name out there in a positive sense. You're the true cowboy here. You're the true sheriff in town taking care of business. I think when that report comes out, he will be named. He will be named more times than one as having, if not violated the laws, certainly skirted them in terms of the people have around him. And we have here in both cases, either Mueller or with Comey, you got to look at just not the person themselves. You got to look at who they surround themselves with. And you have Mueller with people like Wiseman and on down the line of all these Democrat donors and Hillary people. And then you look at Comey having the McCabe's, the Strucks, the Pages around him. And it tells you a lot about how a CEO or a president of a company, or for that matter, the head of an agency or a special counsel type scenario, who they surround themselves with. That tells you as much about the person as anything else. And I think here what we have is clearly a tangled web of like-thinking people who would not dare say no to the boss and just run amok and do whatever they want. And the bottom line is it's finally going to come and catch up with them, and I can't wait till that day arrives.
All right. That makes two of us. Personnel is policy. Good point. By the way, Jim, footnote, since you mentioned The Fugitive, our own Amy Jacobson here was in the sequel to The Fugitive. She played Tommy Lee Jones' stuntman.
Right, U.S. Marshals.
Oh, yeah.
So if you haven't
right.
seen
wow.
it, you might
Yeah.
want to go see
Yeah,
it. I'm in the last scene
Yeah.
of the movie.
I saw it years ago, and now I know more.
She makes the movie. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of TV shows or movies, entertainment, Manhunt is the Netflix series about the Unabomber case, which James Fitzgerald was